In May this year, a suicide bomber targeted a pop concert in the UK's Manchester Arena, killing 22 people and injuring scores of others, many of them teenagers or children. The attack raised difficult questions in the aftermath about how diverse communities in Britain should deal with extremism in their midst. But as reporter Hamish MacDonald found out, it also prompted a city to come together in the face of great stress.
Midnight in the British city of Manchester, where police are responding to what they say is a serious incident at a concert venue.
What's going on? Oh my God!
The attack on Manchester left 22 people dead, 116 people injured. They'd been attending a concert by the American pop star Ariana Grande at the Manchester Arena. It became the single deadliest act of terrorism in the UK since the July 7 bombings of 2005.
There was these massive explosions.
The suicide bomber is Salman Abedi, a 22-year-old born in Manchester to Libyan parents. They'd fled the Gaddafi regime. This city gave them a home.
After our darkest of nights, Manchester is today waking up to the most difficult of dawns. It is hard to believe what has happened here in the last few hours.
The young, the hopeful, the innocent, attacked on a night out. It provoked an outpouring of national grief. And for some, that grief soon turned to anger.
The spotlight here turned almost immediately to Manchester's Muslim population, and in particular, the Libyans. These terrorist attacks are designed deliberately to drive a wedge through communities, to pit everyone else against the Muslims, and they often work, creating fear and hatred. So that's why I've come here, to find out if that's actually what's happening in Manchester, and to find out how the Muslims themselves are dealing with that.
It's summer in Britain, time to get outside. But this is a divided Britain, a troubled Britain, bruised by elections and Brexit, and battered after a run of terrorist attacks. There isn't a lot to celebrate right now, but there is a desire, it seems, to come together.
Everyone's properly stood together, you know, like, you've had a lot of unity in the face of it, really, you know. No one's really being cowed by terror. Everyone's standing up all together.
We're just such a close community, and there's so much diversity here together, and there's just no hate at all here.
That's not quite how everyone sees it here. Far-right groups like the English Defence League have been holding rallies. This one turned violent. In the month after the attack, 224 instances of anti-Muslim hate crimes were reported. That's an increase of 505% on the same period last year. And it's not just on the fringes.
There is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. Things need to change. That will require some difficult and often embarrassing conversations.
It's clear Britain is having something of a moment. 4 terrorist attacks in just 3 months has left many questioning just how tolerant and open this society should be. First, the Westminster Bridge attack, then Manchester, the London Bridge attack, and then a far-right extremist drove a truck into crowds praying at Finsbury Park Mosque. Andy Burnham once had ambitions to lead Britain's Labour Party. He recently left national politics to become the first directly elected mayor of Manchester. And he took up the job just weeks before this attack.
You know, Theresa May, putting politics aside, talked about a need to have a tougher conversation. Certainly people we've met here have said, you know, maybe there is a conversation to be had.
We do need to have a difficult conversation about what more we can all do to tackle extremism of any kind, radicalisation. What more can communities do to spot that, to tackle that, and be honest about that?
Manchester is a small city, just 500,000 people. So this is one of those places where everybody knows somebody who was there that night. Hundreds of people were caught up in this attack, including 15-year-old Samaya. She'd waited months to see her idol, Ariana Grande.
I was waiting for Ariana Grande to come because I knew she was on tour, and then I begged my brother to buy me some tickets. As soon as the show had finished, we heard like a loud bang sound.
Oh my God. What's going on?
Everyone was screaming and I saw someone covered in blood.
Samaya and Gibran are still processing the impact of that night.
I was actually very, very grateful initially, and then obviously after that, then you start to see the faces of the people who died, and it really humanises it, and that's when it starts to dawn on you that, you know, this is a really kind of severe thing that we'd managed to escape.
As soon as this terrorist attack happened, the conversation almost immediately turned to Muslims and to young people being radicalised. How did you interpret that conversation?
Obviously, I fit the description in a sense because I'm Muslim, male, in my 20s, from Manchester. So there are a few similarities there. And unfortunately, that obviously makes other people maybe suspicious of people who fit my description.
These people, they look at me like, oh yeah, you're Muslim, you must be like a terrorist or something. But I was like, no, I was a victim of the attack.
So, is that kind of suspicion exactly what the extremists want other Muslims to feel?
I think that's their aim, is to make us feel unwelcome, to make us think that, to divide us and make non-Muslims look at Muslims in a certain way. So then they obviously use this as propaganda and say, you know, look at the way they look at you. This isn't your home. You know, you may have been born here and brought up here, but this isn't where you belong. Come join us, and those sorts of things. Oh, the one moment you're a victim and the next you're a suspect. You know, that's their aim. So you just need to be strong and make sure you don't kind of succumb to that.
Muslims make up 5% of Britain's population. In Manchester, they make up 16%. And right now, it's the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Tonight, I've been invited to break the fast with the Ben Galbons, a well-known family of Libyans here in Manchester.
Hi.
Hello.
Hashim, I'm Hamish.
Hi, pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hashim.
Thank you so much for having me.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
This one in Arabic, رزب الخلطة, which is just rice with a mix, mixed nuts and raisins on top.
Like the family of the bomber, Salman Abedi, the Ben Galbons came here fleeing the regime of Muammar Gaddafi.
When we came, we were running away for our lives from a brutal regime that kills its opponents, that hangs people in the streets, and does all sorts of things. Manchester asks you for nothing in return. You just sit, enjoy, and be a good citizen.
And you're a Man U fan?
Of course. Of course.
It's very clear from talking to you that you've had a huge emotional reaction to what's happened here in Manchester.
The first thing that came to mind, this is our city being terrorized by one of our own. And where do you start? It's just a feeling of shame. So it is time that we do something in return. We do something to counter that and to prevent it from ever happening again, Hamish.
Do you think there's been a sort of naivety or even a willful ignorance about the realities of what's going on in the community?
I think so. I mean, now we have to say there has been a naivety. I mean, if anybody has a monster in his own home, he needs to be aware of him, help him, report him, straighten him, whatever it takes. Like the friend of ours who landed...
I'm interested to know if this is just Hashim's view, an elder statesman of the local Libyan community, or whether his nephew, Abdul, from a younger generation, thinks the same.
I remember in Didsbury Mosque, which is around the corner from us here, in the early 90s, at the end of I call it the first Afghan war, there was, out of nowhere, a load of, of jihadi fighters ended up in Manchester. Very quickly, they tried to take the mosque over and try to impose their ideas, and if you didn't pray a certain way, if you didn't look a certain way, if you didn't, talk a certain way, you weren't a Muslim. Maybe looking back then, you think, in our naivety, we let them have too much, if you like, give them too much of the benefit of the doubt.
You have to own up to what happened. That was a Libyan who did it. And I think possibly other society is right in telling, hey, Libyans, you have to stand up and be counted here and own up to this.
So if there is a conversation that needs to be had, what is it?
You cannot afford to be pacifist or take a back seat and leave the initiative to others. Initiative is taken by the radical Muslims who are committing crimes in your name, in your religion. Like it or not, it will turn around and you will pay the price.
Something Abdul said over dinner sparked my interest. That Didsbury Mosque had been infiltrated by jihadists back in the 90s. Salman Abedi used to worship here. His father was the muezzin who performed the call to prayer. Rumours of unchecked radical elements in this mosque have rumbled around for years, but elders deny them, saying they report any extremist views, including those of Abedi, to the authorities. But it turns out back in 1989, after the Soviets left Afghanistan, at least 50 jihadist fighters did appear at Didsbury Mosque. Many were Libyan. Their influence has been felt here ever since. And now that's being repeated all over again. During the Arab Spring in Libya in 2011, droves of young British Libyan men went off to fight and overthrow Gaddafi. Britain led the NATO intervention with airstrikes, but it needed ground forces to do the real work. Men like Akram, who went from Manchester to fight.
Why were the British authorities so relaxed about people going off to fight in Libya?
They know they're going for a good cause. That's, I think, the theory, or that's the ideology at the time, that we couldn't get rid of Gaddafi ourselves. The Libyan have to rise up first.
We now know some became radicalised while fighting there in Islamist militias. So, was it a mistake to let them go and then let them come back?
I think it was a mistake. I think it's the mistake they made when people come back, they didn't get their brains examined and checked out. I mean, anybody has been to a war zone, he needs some psychotherapy. Find out if he's gone off the bender or not.
Not everyone who goes off to fight wants to bring the violence back home to Britain. But counter-terrorism forces can't always tell the difference, and that carries enormous risks for countries like the UK.
These type of guys felt isolated between their home and the UK. They're not accepted in a community here, and they're not accepted back home. When back home, they call them white Libyans, and when they come here, they call them terrorists, Islamists, or fighters, or whatever. So the lack of social cohesion with them and understanding what's gone wrong with them helped a lot of these recruiters to go on their heads.
Britain's MI5 has identified 23,000 suspects of interest posing a terrorist threat. But security experts say that is just the tip of the iceberg. Victories against ISIS on the ground in the Middle East have led to a heightened state of alert in the West. And when attacks do happen, security services play catch-up. That means acting fast to arrest and detain suspects.
My name is Iman. I'm from Libya originally, and I've lived in the UK for over 12 years. It's what I call home. The raid and the way it happened, it's just repeating itself constantly in my head, like from not being able to sleep to being constantly alert, like it's like my brain is just on.
Iman is terrified. She has never told the story of this raid until now.
It was just a normal day, really. I was kind of semi-awake, and just out of nowhere, all of a sudden, I just hear a massive bang. It was so loud that you couldn't even tell where it was coming from. I look down the stairs and I can just see people just storming into the house.
It's Sunday, 28th of May, 6 days after the suicide bomb went off at the arena. Across Manchester and the region, security services are conducting counter-terrorism raids, desperate to understand if Salman Abedi was acting alone or as part of a network.
They were storming up the stairs and, like, just the way they looked and, like, they had masks on and I couldn't even see their eyes.
Iman is at home alone. Her street is cordoned off. She had gone to the same college as Salman Abedi, but she says she had no contact and no relationship with him.
One of them came in and he told me I was under arrest for being a suspected terrorist. I was just looking at him, like, confused, like, what are you saying? Like how am I a suspected terrorist? Like, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do.
Of the 22 arrested in these raids across Manchester, not a single person was charged.
You could have just knocked on the door. We would have opened. You would have asked as many questions as you wanted. We would have answered, and that's it.
The British government wants greater powers to conduct raids and detain terrorism suspects. It also wants Muslim communities to play a bigger role in monitoring extremism.
Does your experience make you less likely or more likely to do that?
No, I wouldn't actually do it because, I mean, especially with Salman, he was reported 5 times. So we did kind of raise awareness that this person has these extreme views. So in a way, we are cooperating, we are kind of, you know, speaking out.
Central to solving this problem of radicalisation in the West is the need for security services to build confidence and trust with Muslim communities. Getting that right is tricky because it's exactly those relationships that come under pressure every time there's an attack. It also means looking at root causes like the ideology that underpins groups like ISIS when they preach and recruit. And that means talking about Saudi Arabia. Since the 1960s, the Saudis are said to have sponsored a multi-million-dollar effort to export Wahhabi Islam across the Islamic world, including to Muslim communities in the West. Wahhabism is a strict and overtly conservative interpretation of the faith. And in the UK, that Saudi money has built mosques and Islamic schools, which in turn have played host to extremist preachers and the distribution of extremist literature. Now, none of this would be a surprise to the British government. Downing Street has been sitting on its own report for more than 6 months, which details the foreign funding of terrorism and extremism. Its publication is deemed too sensitive for a government relying on the sale of billions of dollars worth of arms to its Saudi ally. So, what does this mean in reality?
This is not the time to start claiming victimhood. This is the time to be reflective and say we need to take some ownership and actually collectively as a society we need to stand up and address this problem.
Amina Lone is a politician on the local council. She runs a think tank and she's a Muslim. She's prepared to say what few others will, that conservative cultural practices within a faith could be connected to terrorism.
There is a rise of fundamentalism across the globe, and actually if we want to say that these people are misrepresenting our faith, then we've got to show that our faith isn't what these people claim to be, which is very black and white, very politicised Islam.
Today, Amina is taking us to one of the local mosques.
I will just cover up like this. Should be sufficient.
So what are you going to find out now, whether women are allowed in?
Yeah, just to see if there's space for women and kind of what they do and, you know, kind of see how they interact with us.
Right on cue, the local imam turns up to greet us.
Do you know if the mosque is open? I wanted to see if they had a women's section and if I could go in.
For prayers, I'm not sure if they have any.
Yeah, they didn't before, I mean, from what I've known, but I just wanted to know if they'd kind of opened it up.
Yeah. 3 classrooms upstairs, 3 lady teachers.
And normal prayers, you know, for, you know...
The daily congregational prayers, I don't think there is any ladies coming in at the moment.
We are invited in, but without the camera. We're told women are welcome here. But in truth, there is no designated prayer space for women.
Yeah, he was friendly. I'm just going to take this off because I'm boiling that. He's, you know, very friendly, very open, you know what I mean? They want to be inclusive and they want people to know about it. And you can see that he said he didn't want to misrepresent the mosque or the faith. But again, didn't shake my hand, didn't make much eye contact with me.
And why does that matter? Why is that important? Because there are some that would say, well, that's just how the faith is practiced.
Because, you know what, it matters because actually that may be how the faith is practiced here, but then people use that to bash Islam with in terms of you press your women, that you don't believe in gender equality.
How does that make you feel about your faith?
It always feels like you're a second-class citizen. You know, we wouldn't tolerate separate entrances for blacks and whites. That was called apartheid. You know, and yet somehow we kind of turn a blind eye when it's part of a religious reason, and I just don't think it's good enough.
The question of who owns and defines Islam has always been a difficult one for a faith with no central authority. But for Muslims living in the West, events are forcing them to confront that anyway.
We need to be doing something. We need to act on these issues and not be seen to kind of take them for granted, that they just happen and we don't do anything to help.
Amna is a mother of 2 and a community psychologist. Together, she and her friends are writing letters and poems to the people of Manchester.
You have to find that place that brings out the human in you, the soul in you, the love in you from Manchester Libyans.
We wanted to come together and do a project called Love Letters to Manchester. So we're writing messages from all of us. We plan on going into the city centre and basically giving out the scrolls that we've created here. I think the biggest problem in terms of these issues has always been, you know, that online radicalisation and how easy it is for young people to go and access incredibly dangerous people.
So would you prefer that sort of extremist online content is just removed altogether from the internet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why it should be in online spaces. If it's extremist and it's full of hatred, it shouldn't be online.
Pretty hard for any parent, explaining and interpreting terrorist attacks to children is a challenge. And for Muslim mothers, there's an added dimension.
My eldest came to me, I think she must have been reading some comments on various newspaper channels online, and she said to me, I can understand why they hate us now. And I was like, you know, that really... Sorry. I just didn't know how to kind of deal with it, apart from, you know, giving her that reassurance that, you know, that this is nothing to do with us. This isn't about us. You know, this is about an individual who's psycho. You know, nobody could do this unless they were completely unhinged. But I think there's a lot of work for us to do around young people's identities in this country, especially when they're made to sometimes feel that they don't actually belong here, but actually they do. And that's what we need to be dealing with.
Doing a project called Love Letters to Manchester, and we're just giving out people from Manchester a scroll with some letters that were written by Libyan women from Manchester and girls, with some candles and just some sweets for everyone.
I came here to find out what happens after the terror, and what we found is a government demanding difficult and embarrassing conversations, all the while remaining silent on the influence of Saudi money and the fundamentalism it exports here.
You're more than welcome. Hope you have a lovely day. Hope you have a lovely day.
We've found Muslims who genuinely want to engage in difficult debates with the broader community, but still struggle to confront questions over who defines their own faith and how.
From the Libyan community, just to say we love Manchester and hope you have a lovely day. Thank you. Take care.
And in Manchester, we found a city still divided on the solutions, but in both grief and in spirit, united.